Welcome back to On the Clock, our show about making the moments matter. I'm your host, Elisa Gums. Today, we're chatting about something that many of us women know all too well, but we aren't so great at handling, and that's burnout. Joining us is Erayna Sargent, the founder and CEO of Hooky Wellness, which provides workshops, experiential programs, and sabbatical coaching to individuals and corporations such as Microsoft, Netflix, and Google. Erayna, we are so excited to have you here on the Clock. How are you today?
I am well, and I am excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
You call yourself a burnout relief strategist, which is a really cool sounding title, but what does that actually mean?
Great question. I can tell you it's not what I expected to be doing with my career at all. But as a burnout relief strategist, I really help high achieving professionals understand how to recognize their warning signs of burnout, their drivers, and then what are the mental wellness tools and resources that they can navigate to help them find more everyday relief. One of the biggest things about burnout is that while culture acts like it's a surprise, it is actually something that has happened to over 77% of professionals before the pandemic. And so it's a matter of really recognizing it as a cultural situation and then empowering yourself and preparing yourself of how do you manage it when it shows up in your life. So burnout relief strategist is really that support system to give you the space and dedicated support to understand your situation and what you can do about
So you mentioned that it wasn't what you expected to be doing with your life. Before you started Hooky Wellness, you had a 20-year corporate career. What led you to do this work?
because my therapist put me on timeout is literally what it was. So I am a classically trained brand marketer and innovator. So I worked in workspace design, I worked in consumer packaged goods, and I worked in the tech industry. So in going back to get my MBA in that process, it was very much climb the corporate ladder. I'm going to be in consumer packaged goods, make it all the way up to CMO or VP, and that was going to be my life. And I was following that path, and it was an enjoyable path where I got to work with some of the biggest brands in the world, as well as some early stage startups, new brands. But about 7 years ago, I like to say I was blindsided by burnout. I am from Detroit, and so working harder was always what you do. You grind. When things go wrong, you work harder. When you don't know what to do, you work harder. And so I hit a point where working harder was no longer working. And I found myself at my kitchen island late at night after weeks of ridiculous hours, and I just started crying. And I was like, I cannot do this anymore. And so that was a space where I had no knowledge, no understanding, no familiarity with it. And so, in the quest of finding my own relief system, I got to fully appreciate how rampant and regular burnout was, but how we lack the vocabulary and the know how. And so that is how I transitioned out of my corporate path into launching Hooky Wellness. And so, what really cemented it and really helped me understand the name of it was my therapist literally put me on timeout. I was dealing with a lot of lifing at that stage. So, dual household income, we're moving around the country. My father was dealing with cancer at the time. Work, I was having some internal compass shifts, and I took leave. And I took off 5 weeks of leave. And in my first week, my therapist was like, "How's it going?" And I told her the truth, which was I put down my daytime laptop and I picked up my Hooky laptop. And thankfully, my therapist pulled me aside and said, "This is not what we're doing. We are here to rest." And so she put me on timeout. And so during leave, I had to not work at least 3 days a week from 12 to 5. And so in that experience is how I started to really embrace and understand the importance and power of actually sitting down and resting and doing those things that can fill my cup. And so in playing hooky is how I felt empowered to bring this type of experience to others. And it led me on my way to entrepreneurship.
I love how specific that sort of prescription was that she gave you, because so many times people tell us to rest and we're like, okay,
Mhm.
yeah, we're resting. Like, what exactly does that mean? And you were like, not work 3 days a week from 12 to 5. Like, we're not
Oh,
playing
yes.
here.
She was not. She was like, do not write emails, do not read white papers, do not write out decks, do not do any of the things. So she gave me a list and was very real about who I was. And so in those moments is where I sat by the pool. We were in an apartment at the time, sat by the pool and read my magazines again. Like I was like, oh, bon appetit, how I've missed you. It was how I started to go to the museum on Tuesdays. And then we started a ladies who lunch with some girlfriends who were all going through some transition periods. And we just started doing lunch and like hosting lunch during the week, which when do you get to do that? But it's how I got back in touch with myself as well as got reconnected with some friends. So play hooky. That's truly what I love to do is encourage people to play hooky.
We talk about burnout a lot when we talk about work life balance, but I think most of us talk about it in a superficial way, like without understanding what it actually is. What's your working definition of burnout?
Burnout is a state of mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion that is brought on by chronic and prolonged stress. So, one of the reasons I love that definition is because it shows how all encompassing burnout is. Burnout is just not a matter of I'm tired, as well as burnout is a result of untreated, unmanaged stress. So, it is not something that's a fluke. It is not the same as stress, which is a short term elevated situation, but is manageable. Burnout is something that can really result in paralyzation of individuals where they no longer feel that their path is right for them. There is a shift in internal value alignment, and often it can really result in negative impacts on your physical health and mental well being. So, burnout is a progression that takes weeks, months, and sometimes years to go through because it's a full cycle. So often we hear people say, "Oh, I'm so burnt out. I'm gonna just take a nap today and then I'll be fine." That's stress. That's being tired. Burnout often happens and can result in questions like, I no longer know what I'm doing with my life. I no longer feel like myself. I feel completely off. I feel like I want to remove myself from situations. So those are much deeper emotional and long-term impacts that without recognizing it, it can completely derail those who are high potential and are on great career paths or succeeding from the outside in all elements of life. And so we have to make sure that we are recognizing that stress and burnout are cousins, but they're not the same thing.
I've never heard anyone talk about sort of internal alignment or values when it comes to burnout before. Could you go into that a little bit more?
Yes, this is something that happens very often. So there's multiple stages and phases of burnout. So definitely in the later stages, that is where it gets really emotional, internal. And I can speak to my own experience with it and how I knew some things were not quite right and normal. So I had a wonderful opportunity where my director took me to dinner to have career discussions. And it was truly a matter of what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? I am here to support you and help you. And that is an amazing opportunity that so often we are not afforded. But for me in that moment, I realized it was actually causing me to feel turmoil because I did not know what I wanted to do anymore. Because the path that I had already laid out or thought that I wanted was no longer in alignment with the person I was becoming. So values that were are still very important, but a lower priority from a financial security, a position in a company, from just clarity of exact steps to take. Those type of things were shifting in me as I became more focused on entrepreneurship. And so as I started to think about entrepreneurship, it was directly conflicting with financial stability and security because I had made it into tech and it was like, oh, this is what you do, right? And so often people continue to go down a path because it is what's familiar. It might be even what's expected from you as well as from your community and network. And we don't take a step back to say something's not lining up. And it's because of what is happening internally and what is now important to me in this next stage of life. And this experience is so common because so often we're just going, we're doing, we're working, we're achieving, we're on to the next thing. And we don't pause to reflect on have I started to look at the world differently? Have my experiences made me want to have different experiences as I move forward? Nothing's wrong with that, but it's a new stage and a juncture where we need to pause and reflect and to think about it. But we're often not afforded that space and luxury of time to just think and reflect because there's always something to do. So often I find people who are repeating the burnout cycle, and it's because, yes, they've done the things of improving their well being or being more proactive about enforcing boundaries, but they haven't stopped to reflect on, is this the right place for me anymore? Is this the right path or experiences that I want to continue to have? Or should I actually be starting to pivot or just take a slightly different angle on where I'm going?
Thank you for that. That really is enlightening. I
Good.
think so many of us know when something's off, but we don't know how to get to the bottom of what it is that's like off or why. So now that we know what burnout is, how can we recognize when we're experiencing it? Like, what are the telltale signs?
Yes. So one of the big things is don't be surprised and don't be scared by it. So once again, the stat before the pandemic, 77% of professionals, and this is a Deloitte study. Now, as you're looking at things, we're seeing 85%, 95%, depending upon what subsegment of culture we're looking at. So burnout is just a state of being, but it's a cycle. And so if we are able to recognize it in the earlier stages, we can prevent the escalation or at least have a management of it so it is not paralyzing you and the things that you still need to get done. So the earlier stages of burnout, what you see are where it's the space of exhaustion. And this is not purely a matter of I'm tired. This is complete exhaustion that is that is continuing to progress where no amount of you wake up tired, the amount of naps, you're still like, I'm feeling emotionally drained. And so it is deeper than I just need to sleep. Now I say that, but at the same time, recognize if you are noticing patterns where you're having issues sleeping, that's a first red flag because rest is a foundation of wellness. And it can lead to a progression in burnout as well as a progression in a number of other spaces. So always want to highlight if you are having challenges feeling rested, that is a place to start focusing on. That is a foundational piece as you move through the cycle and some other warning signs, if you're starting to pull away from the things that bring you joy, as well as neglecting your basic needs, you're missing breakfast or lunch, you're no longer exercising, you're no longer doing the things that you used to do for joy, you no longer want to hang out with your friends. So you're pulling away from those things that are actually relief valves and help you manage stress because you feel like you don't have space to do it. But those are the very things you need to do. So that's another warning sign in this escalation. Then we get into a place where you get into pessimism, where we see it in the workforce a lot, where everybody sucks. Nobody knows how to do their job. Nobody. And yes, there are challenges with some people on your team, but everybody. And so we start to see a projection or blinders where I'm the only one that can do this. Everybody else is failing. I can't take time off because it will all fall apart without me. So that type of space is where you're starting to add more pressure and stress and go down this slippery slope, which often happens in burnout because it affects your professional efficacy. You find yourself working more, but producing less. Or you're working more and it's taking you longer to do the tasks that are familiar. That is another warning sign that you can see where it's like, oh, this thing used to take me 30 minutes and oh, now I'm spending 2 hours and it's still not done. Yes, you need to get it done, but that's also a sign you need to take a break or do different ways of working. So that could be delegating, that could be rescoping. It's showing you you need to do something differently. And that is what I often see with working professionals because we have so much to do. And if it's taking you longer, you still have to deliver, but we don't step back to say, why am I taking longer to do this? What is not working? So those are some of the earlier signs and progression and some of the really big flags is if you are starting to have that value misalignment, if you are starting to see a ramp up in any other mental health or wellness or even physical challenges you've had, whether it be ADHD or depression or anxiety, burnout can trigger or amplify pre-existing conditions and it becomes this wonderful slippery slope and mechanism where they all start working together, not really in your best interest. So those are some of the warning signs along the way of the progression. But there are things that you can do in every single step. Burnout is reversible. It is manageable. There are ways in which you can prevent the escalation, even if the conditions in which you work in are just burnout ready conditions. But knowing some of the warning signs are some of the first things that you can do.
Yeah. What are some of the common things that you see women doing, and particularly Black women, professionals, and executives in their work lives or their business lives that can lead to burnout?
Yes, so I like to say burnout doesn't discriminate, but it does have favorites. And yes, Black women, we are, teacher's pet on this one. Well, one of the biggest reasons of this, though, is there are just common conditions and known drivers that create burnout. And so these are universal across the board in the workplace. Everything from elevated workload to misalignment of values to a lack of control in the way in which you do things. So there are like six proven drivers. Those are consistent across the board. For women, and especially Black women, on top of that, you're dealing with microaggressions. You're dealing with the often the lack of feeling of belonging or inclusion. You're dealing with a different set of expectations, often from the workplace and leadership, but often internally in the community in which we're in. And so, one of the big things we do, I see a lot of Black women, is we're continuing to have this learned condition of working twice as hard to get half as far. And so, by very nature of that, it's setting us up to be on that path and progression to burnout because you're already set up to do the most. And so, that idea and concept of doing the most, I would say, is what Black women are best at. And it's amazing because we are really good at it. But that is one of the conditions that we have to unlearn in order to get us out of this cycle. And so, some of the things of raising your hand and always taking on more, the extra work for the matter of visibility. Yes, it can be strategic in your career, but it also can just be an extra burden and more work to do. And so, one of the biggest things and opportunities I think for Black women, especially those in the workforce, is to look at all the stuff on our plate and truly be honest on what is a priority and is it strategic and is it needed right now. So, I like to use the three D's, which is delete, delegate, and delay. That those are the things that are really, really helpful if you have a lot on your plate and you're used to having a lot on your plate and you're like, but how do I do it differently? What can you delete and get rid of altogether? This is not a season for busy work. This is just not the season for busy work. So it's a matter of what can we delete. Then it's a matter of what can we delay. So everything doesn't need to happen right now. Can we add in the extra week? Can you give yourself a buffer? One of the things that I have started to employ as well as providing my clients is add your buffer in. So if you're automatically going to say, hey, I can get you that on Thursday, hey, I can get you that on Monday, push
Hmm.
it out. Give yourself a buffer where you need it because when we're dealing with burnout, it will take you longer, even if you haven't admitted it to yourself. So give yourself space. And then the idea of delegating. This can be very uncomfortable, especially for Black women who are used to making decisions and are very good at it. But what can you delegate to your other team members and truly empower them to deliver? So those are the ways in which we can work around that tendency to do the most and do it differently.
You teach, and you said earlier that burnout can be managed and even prevented if we start learning how to catch it in the earlier stages and if we have the right tools. So, what are those essential tools that we all need as ambitious, hardworking women to keep us off the path to burnout?
Yes. So one I would say is a growth mindset. So growth mindset versus fixed mindset really gets into that internal. And when you have a growth mindset, you recognize that things can be done differently. So often we get into the routine of this is just how it has to be done. There's nothing that can change. I have to do the most. I have to do this. I have to do it this way. When you have a growth mindset, you can recognize the end goal, but you're also like, you know what? Maybe 80% is good enough. Maybe I can still get it done if I employ a team and delegate some of these assets to it. So it's having an openness to doing things differently that one will set a foundation so that you are in a space where you can start to take these different actions that can help you get off the burnout cycle. So that's one is having a growth mindset with the way in which things are done as well as what is expected of you and how you are showing up. This moves into taking care of yourself. So we all know, fill up your cup, put on your mask, all of those things that have been going all over social media. Yes, do those things, but the how, how do I do it? So one of the big trains that I'm on is hashtag use your benefits. This is free money. Use the benefits that are employed to you. Your organizations want you to use it, and you want to use it because it is your compensation package. If you don't use it, you're leaving money on the table. One of the things that has really given me a positive spirit is the investment organizations have put in over the past few years in their mental health and wellness benefits, from time off to concierge support to EAPs or employee assistance programs that come with free therapy services. Those are the things that are set out for you and are resources to help you manage the stress so you can avoid the burnout. So, using those resources that are already available to you is another huge thing that you can do and should do. And I love to help people do. I'd like to help you use your money. So, that's a big one. And then the last one is building in accountability and community along the way. So, you won't get into burnout by yourself and you won't get out of it. And so, one part of it is a matter of the resources and systems. So, I call it your burnout battle team, which is the mental health practitioners that can help you, I like to say, keep your ish together when it comes to burnout, but also accountability from your personal network. So, what's that friend that you can say, hey, can you be my accountability for self care? And whether it be to have pre scheduled regular meetups, or let's go make sure we are taking a day off occasionally together, or we're holding ourselves accountable. Or did you schedule your therapy appointment? You know what? I need to do that as well. So let's put it on the calendar and hold each other accountable for those things. So we're as Black women, we're very community oriented anyway. So let's use that community to help us take care of ourselves and to have some fun. Like, it's a lot more fun to play hooky with somebody else than to just, I do like to sit on my couch and binge watch Netflix, but you can be at the other end of the couch with me and we can make our lunch together.
Yeah. And having fun is important, which is, I love the choice of name for your company. I mean, we don't think enough. We think about rest, but you also talk about play and about being creative and about all of the other ways that we can give ourselves a break.
Yes. So with the work that I do with Hooky, I'm very anchored in the pillars of mental wellness. So, with the approach of Hooky, I take frameworks of design thinking and fuse it with mental wellness. So, it's a matter of how do I make it easier, digestible, and make it something you actually want to do. It makes it a lot easier to create new habits. And so, there's four core pillars of mental wellness: growth, rest, play, and community. All of those collectively help to reinforce and support and strengthen your well being, as well as it helps you figure out different ways that you can offset stress and strengthen your well being. So, everything from therapy and journaling and nutrition and diet to the massages and the yoga and the stretching and aromatherapy, or literally playing games and being in nature and volunteering. All of those things are actually a part of mental wellness. But so often we stop the conversation at therapy, yoga, and the spa. We're like, that's all you can do. But the world of mental wellness is huge, and it's something I did not grow up with this. I had to learn it. Like, I am from Detroit. We literally work. That is how I was
That's
raised.
it. You just
You
worked.
Yes, you work and you'll be fine. And so I jokingly say, but it's real. I'm like, I learned about therapy from different world. Relax, relate, release. And I took that with me and I hit a point where I was like, I think therapy is what would help me here. It helped Whitney, so I think it can help me. And so that is something, is to understand there's so many tools, and wellness is not one noted, that you can find what's right for you. Like, a plunge bath is not right for me, but it might help you and reinvigorate your lymphatic system. While otherwise, you will find me on a massage table every day if I could. So that helps me manage the stress and the muscle tension that I know happens when I am in an elevated level of stress. So now I know how stress shows up in me. I know when it's at a different point, and I know what I can do about it to stay ahead of it. Because if you've ever experienced burnout, especially deep burnout, you want to avoid it happening again.
You talked about having a growth mindset so that we can be open to working in different ways. And I just want to tackle sort of two of the biggest stumbling blocks that I've seen to this. One is the guilt that we feel when we take time to rest, and the other is the fear that we have. That for many Black women is a really valid fear that if we're not overworking, we won't be able to keep up or compete or get ahead.
Mhm.
So, how do we quiet those two things, the guilt and the fear?
Yes. I will say that guilt is real, and that is something that will take time to condition out of. Just know you can condition out of it, and you need to start. So when that starts to rear up, what is real and what is perceived? So that's one of the first set of questions that I'll ask. What of the guilt is real and what is perceived? Is so if you have stress and you're trying to schedule, I'm going to take a day off in 2 weeks, and you are starting to feel guilt, is it real? Is it because there's a huge deliverable that is due right after that? And so your team will be sort of up the creek without you if there's any decisions. If that is a real driver of a true point of stress and guilt, potentially you wait or you push that date back where you take off so that there is no stress that is real. Or if you're a matter of, you know what, I need to take this day off. I have no choice. I need to take it now. My team will be fine. What can you do to make sure that the team is fine? Make sure that you're communicating the expectations, deliverables, answering the questions in advance so they don't need to bother you and you can truly relax and appreciate your time off. So, what can you do to eliminate the stress and make sure everybody else is good? It's a big one. Because so often we leave the office or we find data has shown that when people take time off, over 52% of them still say that they're unable to unplug because they're taking the stress of the work into their time off. So having clarity before you go out, communicating before you go out, answering the questions, and then setting up so you can check in once you're back can eliminate some of that guilt and stress that is real. The perceived part of it is recognizing that you might have some guilt because you are doing things differently. So it requires you to think differently. So if it's perceived guilt, one of the exercises you can do is a journaling exercise where you're really flushing through why do I have that guilt and just free flowing in journaling. I find that as a huge tool as someone who's very cerebral and overthinks a lot. Journaling is a tool that helps me when I can't get to therapy. Just flushing out those thoughts can really get to, oh, I'm feeling guilty because my organization actually doesn't empower me to take time off, or my leader has said other notes about other people. So that's why I feel guilty. So that helps you pinpoint what's going on. And then once you know, then you can do. It's sort of the scientific method applied to your own relief. And then I always say, push through it. Like the guilt's going to be there at the beginning. That does not mean you stop. That does not mean you don't prioritize your well being, because if you don't, you will end up needing my services for the recovery part. And we want to avoid that. So some of it is a matter of pushing through. If you've done what you needed to do, if you have been responsible in taking your time, you need to be present and use that time. Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to show up and deliver in the way that you want. You're not going to get that rating because you're not able to deliver. So it's one big thing in the mindset shift is recognizing that rest and relaxation is part of productivity. It is not a conflict to it. It is how you can get to that line, get to that finish line, and get to it in a way that you are proud of showing up. And one last thing is sometimes we also need to rescope our expectations of ourselves and what we can do. That is a big thing of guilt that I've seen with clients is I know I can't show up, but I have to make this effort. But you need to step back and say, you know what, your bandwidth is not the same as it normally is. So you can't give 110% because you literally don't have it. And that's a conversation for another day. But if you can't do it, don't feel the guilt because you're recognizing it and you can make other arrangements to still get things done in a different way. So those are three different areas that I think are really important for us as we start to find new ways of working, find and build more relief into our everyday moments.
This has been so very necessary. Thank you so much, Erayna, for sharing the unique ways You're helping people make the most of the time we've been given by making sure we protect our wellness and our happiness. And
Thank
thank
you.
you all for watching On the Clock. We'll see you next time as we continue to talk about working with purpose and living with passion.